Welcome to this episode of Grassroots Advocacy. I'm glad to welcome you back. Last week, we had the opportunity to see a re-airing of episode 1, which was the start of the Grassroots Advocacy conversation. And part of the reason that we had the opportunity to do that was because I was traveling last week and had the opportunity to visit a number of member centers. As I was visiting one of our member centers, I had the opportunity to speak with a young nursing assistant, and she expressed a concern about having having to get her residents up early to go to the dining room. And she was essentially saying, I don't understand why in this day and age, my supervisors would be so insistent about getting folks up so early. So that really got me thinking, because that was a challenge that we experienced quite commonly in the very early 90s. But since then, we've had some really great adaptations or evolutions, if you will. For example, a number of organizations have gone to an open dining experience. Other organizations have created cafes. And still other organizations have created a system called room service. So we've done a number of things over the years to be able to respond to individual preferences and desires. So it really did catch me a little bit off guard when she suggested this. So this is really the core of our discussion today. What could we do to respond to that situation? And so I have a 3-point plan I'd like to give you to think about. The first thing I'd like to ask you to think about is trying to understand what's motivating that supervisor to encourage you to get a person up who perhaps has suggested that they don't want to. And when I talk about trying to understand their motivation, sometimes it's okay to say, my experience with this particular resident or patient is that they like to sleep in. So what would be the main reason that you would want me to go ahead and get them up? Now, they may say, well, during the last care planning process, we came to the realization that Mr. X or Mrs. X is self-isolating. And so we're really trying to promote going down to the dining room to increase socialization. Or the supervisor might say, well, you know, I've been a nurse for 20 years, and this is just how we've always done it. So it's really important to kind of understand where that leader's coming from in terms of their motivation. Partly because if you understand their motivation, you can better understand how to respond to their concern. And partly because oftentimes we make broad assumptions like, oh, they don't care, or things of that nature, when that's really not the case at all. They have some other motivators. So really take the time to try to understand where they're coming from. The next recommendation, in number 2, is to really be knowledgeable on the subject. So you want to gather facts. Review that resident's care plan. Does the resident's care plan say that they're going to be up at a particular time to go to the breakfast or go to lunch or go to dinner? There may be some concerns because they've had weight loss or something of that nature, and so they're just really trying to increase intake and that sort of thing. Also, look at their social history. For example, John, who was a farmer for 30 years of his life, is probably accustomed to being up before the sun comes up and eating breakfast and then getting out into the field. However, Jenny, who worked on the night shift, is probably just getting ready to go to bed. So it's important to kind of understand what the history of that person is and how that will impact the choices that he or she is making. Another thing to be cognizant of or aware of is, what are your residents' rights? We have the residents' rights and the patient's bill of rights. There are a couple of different governing documents. So it's important to understand those documents, because if you understand those documents, you're better able to respond to your supervisor with some logical, fact-based suggestions. And so you could think of it this way. If I was your supervisor and you came to me and said, hey, I'm not getting him up, that might upset me as a supervisor. It might seem like you're being insubordinate or you're bugging the system. However, if you came to me and said, hey, Jeff, I just finished reviewing Mrs. So-and-so's social history. And one of the things I discovered from that social history is that she worked nights. And so she is typically, at this point in time, going to bed from working a long night. So is it okay if we try to do something different? Like maybe we can offer her a snack when she first wakes up. What do you think about that? So it's good for you to understand those different fact-based documents so that you're able to offer your leaders some options, some alternatives to choose from, as opposed to simply saying, I'm not going to do it. The third thing that I'd like to ask you to think about is what are some options you can offer to that leader so that then they have a menu of choices? Just like our elders would prefer to have a menu of choices, our leaders like having choices as well. And, pardon me, when we have thought through it carefully and have put together some well-structured options, it lets our leaders know that we are concerned about meeting their desires and their expectations as well as the people that we have the opportunity to serve. So in this particular instance, we might say to the supervisor, hey, Mr. X has consistently declined getting up during this time to get prepared to go down to the dining room for breakfast. So what I was thinking was perhaps we should see if we can't get the kitchen to make breakfast a little bit later in the morning for him. Or maybe we could create a hall tray with some of the items that he really enjoys eating, and then we'll just bring it to him when he's prepared to get up and get around and get started for the day. Another option might be to suggest that for the elder to suggest that, hey, I understand you want to continue to have rest. My concern is I don't want you to have significant weight loss. So would you be willing to have maybe a protein shake or something of that nature, just so we make sure you're getting nourished and you're still having the opportunity to sleep in if that's what you choose to do. As with all things, it's really important for you, the advocate, to be as knowledgeable as you can and to try to understand the issue, in this particular case, the dining experience or getting up early, really understanding that to the fullest of your ability, because when you do that, you're able to speak more intelligently about what's going on. I really appreciated having the opportunity to visit with that young lady this past week, and I'm thankful that I'm having the opportunity to share this time with you now. I want to conclude our time today, this episode today, with this quotation from Nelson Mandela. Deny people their human rights. To deny people their human rights is to challenge their humanity. So when men and women move into the post-acute and long-term care setting, they are not abandoning their rights as human beings, as citizens of this great nation. And so please keep that in mind as you're working with them. And when we do that, we will better serve them. I look forward to being with you during our next episode.